This is MindPower.
Hi, and welcome back to yet another great episode of MindPower. I'm Bryce L. Tomlinson of NewDepthMedia.com. Some of you know that about a year ago, I purchased a Panasonic Lumix GH2 camera for my video business. At that time, it seemed to be the obvious choice for the direction New Depth Media was going, and after a lot of analysis over the past year, I'm still quite sure that I made the right decision. But after the last few months of teaching film at an art school and learning a lot from video veterans such as those in the frugal filmmaker community, I came to the conclusion that I might want a better lens than what comes with the kit version of the GH2. In my case, a 14 to 42mm autofocus kit lens with an aperture that only stops down to f5.6. Part of my problem was that when shooting footage, even if I had all the settings on manual, the camera would shift the lens aperture while I was shooting, making the brightness go up and down. Asking around, I found that this wasn't something I was going to be able to stop, as most kit lenses have electronic apertures that you can't stop from changing dynamically during shooting. Aperture numbers are a funny thing, in that the smaller the number, the bigger the aperture. I also noticed a lot of folks talking about ISO, and that if you want low noise, you need to shoot at lower ISO settings, such as those below ISO 1600, because in low light with a high ISO setting and a small aperture, you get a lot of noise. After a bit of research, I came to the conclusion that the first lens I should add to my arsenal should be a 50mm lens, with as low an aperture number as possible. Most guys were talking about f-stops as low as f1.2 or f1.8, but many of those lenses were outside my price range, as the wider the aperture, the more of those tiny articulated fins it takes to open up the iris of the lens, which makes the mechanics of the lens more complicated, which drives the price up. Watching a few videos, I noticed that a lot of folks seemed to mention Pentax lenses, and it hit me. I had purchased a Pentax lens about 6 years ago to use on the end of my depth of field adapter for my Sony camcorder. Only problem was, depth of field adapters lose a lot of light, and my Sony camcorder didn't do very well in low light, so I pretty much ditched the idea, and the Pentax lens sat on my shelf for all those years. Dusting it off and taking a closer look, I found that it was in fact a 50mm lens with an aperture of f2.0. I knew down the line I might want a better lens, but 2.0 was a lot better than 5.6, and as it turns out, I got this lens at a thrift store for $10. With the addition of a $10 to $12 adapter, I was quickly able to hook up this Pentax K-mount lens to my Micro Four Thirds GH2 camera. One thing to keep in mind when buying lenses and adapters, my Pentax lens happened to have an aperture ring right on the lens, so I can adjust the f-stops with that, but if I were dealing with a lens that is controlled by the camera, I might want to buy an adapter that includes an aperture ring. In this case, I was able to go with a cheaper adapter that doesn't have the aperture ring because mine's built right into the lens. Another thing to think about is that built into most modern DSLRs, you'll find a function called AE lock. This means auto exposure lock. Even if you have all your settings on manual, you may still find your camera dummying up your shots by changing the exposure settings. AE lock assures you that your camera's auto exposure stays locked down, and you can control the exposure manually using the dials on your camera and the aperture ring on your lens. This is important. Don't leave this detail out, or you'll probably be scratching your head for a while after you buy your first third-party lens. So here's what you've been waiting for, the results. Here I have a relatively low light situation in my kitchen. What you're going to see is a series of shots, first with the 14 to 42mm kit lens at its widest aperture of 5.6, then with the 50mm Pentax at its widest of f2.0. In all these shots, the AE lock is on, and I have manually set the white balance. I will first show shots at ISO 320, then ISO 1600, then at ISO 3200. Shooting first with the 14-42mm kit lens at ISO 320, you can pretty much see that there's nothing to see. You can barely make out any of the details of the shot. Overhead, I have one compact fluorescent bulb and a small window nearby, giving me some overcast daylight. It doesn't help trying to focus on a particular subject, as there just isn't enough light to make anything out. Here's the same shot with the Pentax 50mm lens. You can clearly make out everything in the shot. There's a huge difference between what we can see with the aperture of 5.6 on the previous lens and f2.0 the Pentax. The bokeh is beautiful, and I can even make out when I shift the focal point between dishes that are as little as 5 to 6 inches apart. Here's the Lumix kit lens again at ISO 1600. Still very dark and difficult to make out any details of the subject. Hard to believe that at ISO 320, the Pentax lens outperforms the Lumix lens at ISO 1600, but here it is. The Pentax at 1600 looks gorgeous. All the colors come to life, and shifting focus from one point to another, the bokeh, or blurring of subjects outside of the depth of field, is quite appealing. Side by side, there's no comparison. Then at ISO 3200, the Lumix kit lens comes to life, but there is a lot of noise going on. This is because the camera is not really getting all the information it needs to get a clean picture, and so it compensates by boosting weak pixels. It has a nice shallow depth of field at 42mm, but the graininess of the shot is distracting. On the other hand, the Pentax lens wins again, giving a nice clean ISO 3200 image due to the fact that the wider aperture of F2.0 gives the camera all of the info it needs to make the image really pop correctly. Side by side, the differences are obvious. I understand these Pentax lenses can be had for around $50 to $100, which is nice, especially since it pretty much transforms my whole filming experience without having to buy a new camera, which probably wouldn't have helped as much. You can also find these old lenses laying around or on Craigslist. Many of your neighbors might have a stash of old camera equipment, and if you look on Amazon or eBay, you might be able to find an adapter to make such a lens fit on your camera. They make them for everything from Tamron to Canon EOS, Nikon to Sony, and even my little Panasonic GH2. It should also be noted that it's said that many of the Pentax and Takumar lenses are radioactive, which can be tested with a Geiger counter. I've been told that as long as I don't sleep with them, I probably won't grow an extra arm or anything. Who knows? Anyway, I really like this lens, and I hope you found this video useful. See you next time. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, you can help me out by clicking those like and favorite buttons down below. And if you enjoy seeing tech tutorials, reviews, and more, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. I hope you do. Also, if you have any questions or ideas to contribute, make sure you tell me about it in the comments below. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on MindPower.